Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Atomy Brainwaves, our podcast on education for educators. Brainwaves is produced by our wonderful team here at Atomy. What is Atomy? It's an online teaching and learning platform for secondary education. We provide engaging, curriculum-specific video and text lessons for over 190 subjects, as well as matching quizzes and exam practice that can be used for both learning and formative assessment. We also provide powerful analytics that can help teachers diagnose how their students are progressing and zero in on who might need a little bit of extra help. Our goal is to help make life easier for our teachers, give them more time to work on the most important things, and ultimately help to generate better outcomes. If you want to find out more about Atomy, head over to our main site at getatomy.com and feel free to try it out for free. Today, I have the privilege of speaking to Steph Reed, autism specialist teacher, advisor, and consultant. Steph broke down for us exactly what autism is and how it affects children, discussed a variety of teaching methods that can be employed in mainstream and specialist schools to teach children with autism, and outlined how policymakers in education can best facilitate autism teaching. If that sounds good to you, feel free to subscribe to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you do your podcast listening. And we'll always appreciate a quick 5-star review. In the meantime, have a listen and enjoy.
Are you going to teach us anything?
What, you want me to teach you something? You want to learn something? All right. You got it!
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Atomy Brainwaves. I'm your host Simon, and today I'm joined by a very special guest, Steph Reed, autism specialist teacher, advisor and consultant, recognized specialist leader in education and creator of the website, The Autism Spectrum Teacher. Welcome, Steph.
Thank you for having me, Simon. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here and to speak to you.
Thank you for coming on. We had to overcome a couple of technical hurdles before,
but we got there.
Before we started recording. I think we realized that Zoom was which we're not using, let me just say, was the villain. But we solved the problem. Well, you solved the problem. We
got there in the end.
I provided moral support. You solved all of the issues.
I'm sure a lot of people can relate, actually, all these technical issues that we've been having a lot of recently with our video calls and meeting online. And there's sometimes
Absolutely.
Technology doesn't go quite to plan, but we can get there in the end, hopefully.
We're getting better. Slowly but surely we're catching up to where the technology is. Certainly better than we were in the past. But speaking of the past, I'm going to start, as we always do with guests, by just getting a brief run through of your journey in education. So going back to the beginning of your teaching days, the kind of twists and turns in the road that led you to the, I guess, fairly unique and very important position that you are in today.
Yes, so I'm going to try and tell my personal experiences as well as my professional and combine them and show you my journey. So
very exciting.
Yeah, when I was at college, I was lucky to have some really nice school placement experiences alongside children who are autistic, special needs, in different schools, so mainstream and special schools. And this just opened up my eyes to learning about autism, learning about the different way people learn and think. And I just wanted to learn everything about autism. And I just dived into it and was, I would say, quite lucky to be given the advice very early on, go and teach mainstream first, go and get a good overall kind of background of mainstream education, and then go and specialise, because all I wanted to do was specialise straight away. And looking back now, it was a really good move. I taught mainstream for 2 years before I specialised in teaching autistic children in highly specialist provisions, such as special schools for catering for the needs of autistic children. Now, alongside that, myself, if I kind of rewind when I was at school, I left school, didn't have particularly good grades. I found, I guess at that point, I wasn't sure about my learning styles. I've learned so much about learning now. But when I left school, I was diagnosed as dyslexic. And this changed the way I understood how I was learning. And after that assessment and finding support in order to help me understand my learning needs and understand how I could maybe approach learning differently, I started getting A grades. I started doing really well in terms of when I went on to study special needs and disability. So I had this kind of personal understanding of learning differences, and when you meet those learning needs, how well you can do, as well as my interest in understanding the way different people experience the world, as well as, I mean, autism is just so fascinating, so interesting. I love spending time with lots of different people. But when you really think about learning and how we learn, we know that everyone doesn't learn in the same way.
Of course.
So, of course, we need to approach learning and teaching often in a very personalised way, especially when we're thinking about individuals with very complex needs and different learning needs. So for the last 3 or 4 years, when I was in my last teaching placement in a specialist school, I developed a model of outreach to support mainstream schools, because sometimes what you'll find is there's really good practice in some schools, particularly in special schools, because we've got lots of expertise, lots of teachers that are doing lots of different types of training around special needs. So it's getting that practice into mainstream schools. So I developed this outreach program, so supporting different mainstream schools. And then, unfortunately, with the government funding, this program had to stop. But I decided to carry it on myself. So I took what I was already doing and have continued to support schools on an independent basis. So I work with a range of schools, services, colleges, doing training, and really focusing on staff development, coaching teachers, teaching assistants, leaders, working with leaders to really think about inclusive practice and how we're supporting the learning of students with a range of learning needs. So this is the work I'm doing at this moment in time, and I've also got a range of online courses as well to support teachers and parents with supporting the holistic needs of children, autistic children, and, well, with a range of neurodiverse needs, you could say. So,
wow, amazing. Yeah, and such a fascinating journey, and really, I of course goes without saying, but a very noble undertaking and important pursuit. And what's really interesting, and what we're going to get into hopefully a bit later on, is how, your work has sort of encompassed multiple different levels, be it yourself as the teacher in the classroom, or interacting with kind of policymakers and on almost a higher level, trying to, with regards to policy for children with autism. And we're gonna dive into that as we go along. But before we do, I thought it might be a good idea for our listeners just to have an exploration, clear definition of what exactly autism is, because I think, as with a lot of things, there are often misconceptions or half understandings, or people have a certain degree of understanding of what something is, but not the full picture. So before we proceed, I thought I would ask you just to kind of define for us what autism is, dispel some common misconceptions, and just maybe outlining how it manifests in, of course, particularly the behaviour of children.
Yes, so we know that autism, every autistic individual is different, just as every person is different. Within autism, there are three main areas of challenge or areas of difference. So those areas are communication and social interaction. So within this area, again, there's a whole range, but individuals will experience some level of challenge in terms of their communication. So within communication, we've got receptive, so the understanding of communication, and we've got expressive communication, so our ability to express and give that communication message. So it could be that individuals will have, and it could be maybe at one end, difficulties with both receptive and expressive communication. Maybe that individual doesn't have any verbal language or a meaningful use of verbal language. Their understanding of language may be, they could have a good understanding of language. It might be that they don't necessarily have a good understanding of language, and we're thinking about different ways of supporting their communication. Again, with social interaction, there's so many different parts to social interaction in terms of our non-verbal communication, as well as our understanding of social rules, for example. This can be something that individuals may find it really difficult to understand, and therefore teaching social rules explicitly is going to be really helpful. But it might be actually that, again, it's just so broad, but this is a area of challenge to some degree that an autistic individual will experience challenges with. Another area is what's known as restricted repetitive patterns of behaviour and interest. So this could be for a number of reasons, but what we may see in individuals would be perhaps repeating something, having that need for things to be the same. Now, this could be for different reasons, because, of course, if we've got difficulties with communication and understanding the communication from other people, and as well, the third area, which is sensory processing. And this is such a huge area because this is going to impact on communication and the way somebody is experiencing the world around them, and therefore their behaviour and the way that they think about things. So sensory processing, we've got our 5 main senses. We've got our sight, our smell, our taste, our hearing, our tactile system, which is our touch, which individuals can either experience really sensitively, or on the opposite end, perhaps not even register that sensory input.
Yeah.
We've also got 3 other sensory systems that are really important. Our vestibular sensory system, so our sense of balance. Our proprioceptive sensory system, which is our awareness of our body in space. And also our interoception sense, which is our internal sensory system. So our when we're sensing that perhaps we're hungry, or our emotions, so maybe when we're feeling those butterflies in our stomach, when we're feeling anxious. So these sensory systems could be underdeveloped in autistic individuals. So it could be that perhaps if we're thinking about that interoception sense, if that understanding of when they're hot or too cold, or they're hungry or not hungry. If these messages are confused, of course, this is going to have a big impact on everyday life and ability to regulate those senses. So I'll just give you an example of a student of mine who, on the very, what you may say, kind of extreme sensory sensitivity, whereby he was often walking around with his fingers in his ears, very, very highly anxious, of course. He's got really heightened senses. His communication, in terms of, he doesn't have any verbal speech. So in terms of his ability to communicate and express his needs, we were supporting him using a lot of pictures and objects, and being really using very limited language. That's one individual. It might be that another individual, actually, they are experiencing their senses maybe not so much. In terms of an example, I had a student he looked like he was always very tired, and he's very, very floppy. So we did a lot of kind of work around his understanding of his body in space, and that really supported him to sit up in a chair. And I mean I could go on for, there's just such a broad range of when it comes to sensory processing. The key thing here to remember is that we're all not experiencing the world in the same way. So when we're supporting students, we really need to think about how they are experiencing the world around them, and how we can perhaps support the environment. So just trying to sum up all of what I've just said, the key 3 areas for autistic individuals and why they will receive that diagnosis is because they experience challenges that affect their everyday life in the areas of communication and social interaction, with what's known as restricted, repetitive patterns of thoughts and behaviour, and with sensory processing. And they may have different types of communication themselves and language ability. And also, what's really important to think of here is that autistic individuals can have a very high IQ, or a typical IQ, or they may have learning difficulties or severe learning difficulties and autism. So that's the examples that I gave there of those students are students who are autistic with severe learning difficulties. So that's quite important to think about, because of course not everybody will also have learning difficulties as well. But that is where my background is with teaching.
Okay, yeah, really concise and broad-ranging explanation there, covering some really key areas. And what's, I guess, one thing that's standing out to me there is kind of the importance of recognizing that while, of course, behaviors will fall under the spectrum of autism, these manifestations can appear so different from one even within the examples you gave. They can look so different from one individual to the other. And there's also the question you raised there of learning difficulties, and how that is in and of itself can be a separate thing to a child's autism. So I suppose, would it be fair to say what's really important is having a strong understanding of these underlying issues with regards to the sensory element of things and the communication thing, so that even when it's different behavioral manifestations, if you have that understanding, you can recognize what the underlying causes at play. Completely.
And to have that good understanding of the potential barriers to learning and communication. I mean, I've seen within my experience, just one interaction between a teacher and a student can go completely different ways. For example, if that individual has perhaps, compared with their peers, their social understanding of perhaps what might be seen as appropriate. I mean, this in terms of appropriate behavior, this is a whole theme in itself. For an autistic individual, it may be quite difficult to grasp that concept, especially in different contexts. So it might be that actually let's take a classroom situation, and a student has said something to a teacher, maybe because they've misunderstood what that teacher has said. Now that teacher, if they interpret that as that student's being rude, or that student has said it on purpose, when actually that student has completely misunderstood the situation or has not understood the concept. Abstract concepts for autistic individuals are going to be very challenging to grasp, depending on that individual. So having that understanding about autism is going to really, really help, because if that teacher is able to therefore respond to that student in a way to help them understand, rather than taking the approach of they were being rude or they meant to say something, you can see how that can go, and it can spiral into different completely situations where it's not helpful. It's not helpful to the student, it's not helpful to the teacher, it's not helpful to the class. What we really need to do is understand the student and their needs and their understanding of different situations, and that's definitely really key.
Hey folks, hope you're enjoying the episode so far, and we've got plenty more to come after this quick break. Here at Atomy Brainwaves, we're all about education, and not just for students, for ourselves too. We would love to hear from you, whether that's feedback on one of our episodes or a question you'd like to see answered by one of our guests or by Sue. So, if you've got a comment or a question, don't hesitate to email us at brainwaves@getatomy.com. Looking forward to hearing from you. In the meantime, let's get back to it. Yeah, and you've almost led right into what I was going to ask you next with regards to teaching. You know, we've if that's the understanding side of things, and almost the underlying background understanding of autism and how it manifests in children, then the follow on from that is of course this question of the response of what teachers can do. And we'll start, if it's okay, with, I guess, what you might call a micro look at autism teaching. By that I mean the one teacher within the classroom, and the question of what that teacher can do, how they can teach in such a way to provide support for autistic children, to work with the children to provide as constructive and healthy a learning environment, as opposed to what you were talking about there, which is when the teacher just doesn't understand, and it can lead to destructive, unhealthy friction. And I guess we'll start maybe by talking about, because obviously there's going to be a big difference between mainstream schools and specialist schools. So why don't we start with mainstream schools and talking about what teachers can do there, and then maybe move on from that to discuss specialist schools, because obviously, as you said, you've got, a wealth of experience in both environments.
So, of course, something that's already been mentioned and that's really, really important is understanding or trying to know the student's individual needs as much as possible. And this could be, of course, parents and carers have, of course, they are the parents and carers. They know their children the best. So any information that you can gather in terms of what the students' interests are, what motivates them, what they might find difficult. It could be that you are able to find out information through information that's been given to you, of course. But in terms of really understanding the student and getting to know them, it's really important in knowing what's going to help and support them. And then we need to think about those inclusive strategies that are going to support the student, but also support a lot of other students. So we're thinking about making things as clear as possible. And it can really help to think about, perhaps within our lesson, within our learning, how are we making the learning outcomes, the structure of the lesson really clear and broken down. It could be that we've got each part written down in a sequence, maybe for children who may not find not access text, but even I was going to say pictures are really, really helpful, but even for all types of students, that visual picture can be really helpful, and students can grasp meaning. I talk from personal experience here. That would have helped me throughout my whole education, just having that visual to support abstract concepts, for example. So it could be that this is how I teach all my lessons. I always have a visual breakdown of the structure. So it might be I'll have a picture that shows each part of the session, and this helps to make it really clear when the beginning is, when the ending is. And then throughout the learning, I'm going to be using lots of visual resources, lots of objects. I'm going to try and bring things to life visually as much as possible. It might be actually that, I love practical, really concrete types of learning. So, we're going to be using our bodies. Of course, this might not be an approach for every type of lesson, but we're really thinking about the way that we're using resources that are going to support those individuals and help with their understanding of perhaps the concept that we're learning or the learning objectives. Another really supportive, inclusive strategy is to really think about how we're explaining and using our language. Because sometimes we can, maybe even when we're talking, we might use lots of words in a sentence. And for students who perhaps have communication needs, some of that language might get lost. Or if they've got a short attention span, we really need to think about how we can communicate this in a way that's going to be as accessible to them as possible. So we're thinking about, for example, let's take, this is quite often a situation that I might observe, a class on the carpet. You quite often see that in primary schools. And the teacher is introducing the lesson and they're talking about it. Now, for some of those students that may have different attention skills or communication skills, by having something tangible or something visual, you're already going to make that, whatever the teacher is talking about, more accessible to them. It could be something that they can hold themselves. It could be that this is something that all of the children can hold and look at. But we're just making it come to life more, and this can be really helpful to a lot of students. Even when we're thinking about secondary sixth form, we're just adding that visual aspect. I don't know whether you do this, but I mean, in my calendar, I make it as visual as possible. Like I color code things. It really helps. It helps. It
does. No, absolutely. Yeah.
So yeah, we're thinking about those kind of inclusive strategies. What can really be helpful, which sometimes, and it's such an easy thing to do, but sometimes we may forget to do it, is modelling. as teachers, modelling everything. So modelling the communication and language that we'd like the students to learn. Modelling, if we're going to be doing something, we need to show them first. If we just rely on telling them what to do, then we have already kind of opened up the opportunity for misunderstanding. So if we're modelling how we're going to do something first, and we can do this by being there ourselves, or maybe it's going to be a video, some way of showing what to do can be really, really helpful, especially when we're thinking about communication.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so many great examples in there of practices that can be done. And one theme would it be fair to say that maybe runs through a lot of these is that a lot of it involves breaking down and making really explicit and really visual and obvious processes that maybe many of us would just almost sort of take for granted in maybe, learning environments we would have experienced. For instance, I think of my own schooling experience, and a lot of the things you're talking about would have been things that are almost unsaid, but are there. Whereas within this kind of specialist autism teaching environment, it's a case of these processes that are still happening are just being made that much more explicit and that much clearer, so that they can be picked up on in the same way.
Exactly. And consistency is so important in terms of these types of strategies should be used all the time in order to support students. If I'll give you an example that
Please do.
That really highlighted the importance. I guess teaching autistic children with severe learning difficulties has really shown me just how, the way that different individuals can think, and making things so explicit. You can't make things too explicit. So, for example, a student of mine who, when he came to the class, and this is a student who has no verbal language, communicates through gesture and using pictures. When he came to the class, he was the term dysregulated in terms of all of his sensory systems, in terms of he'd come to the class because he had got to the point in his previous school where he was not engaging in any of the learning. So he moved school, came to the class, and it was very challenging at first to engage him. Through learning his interests, I was able to put in place some things. So, for example, I knew he liked to throw a ball. So, with throwing the ball, you can incorporate some aspects of the curriculum. Even we've got our physical, but also we're thinking about maths. We can also do we can do so many different things. Now we were able to gradually introduce him to the lessons and to the learning. He was taking part in all of the sessions. But something that I noticed very early on was, I mentioned before about breaking down the lesson with pictures. Yeah. So I always have them a really large one. Sometimes for students, if I want to support their independence further, I'll give them an individual one so they can work their way through it themselves, which is great because actually they don't need somebody there telling them what to do. They can see it. That's a really good support to help with their independence. So what I noticed was when we were doing a session, if there wasn't a tidy up symbol I used, he wasn't going to tidy up, because what's there to show him that he needs to tidy up? Of course, of course we can say it, but this child has severe communication difficulties. Now, when that was there, he was so happy to tidy up. In fact, he would do everything that he could see. He was very familiar with this structure. Again, going back to consistency, we use this structure every time, so he was very familiar with it. Now, he can see the beginning, he can see the ending, and when we did the last thing, that was the lesson finished. He would get up from his chair, and that to him, it's finished. We also had a visual timetable which showed him his whole day, which really supports his independence. He was able to go to the next session because he can see it on his individual timetable. Now, this just showed me the importance of breaking things down, because if it's not there, how is that student going to know what they need to do? And we can't just rely on ourselves telling students, especially those with communication difficulties. Now, I'm just thinking of an example in a mainstream school, a student who doesn't have learning difficulties. He is autistic, and what I noticed was in the sessions he wasn't completing the task that was set. This task was set from the teacher at the beginning. Now, some of these strategies are really simple, but it's really just thinking about how that child might be thinking. What really supported him was on his desk just to have it written and broken down exactly what he needed to do. Write 2 sentences. And then he knew that he needed to write 2 sentences. But without that, I mean, when we think about our lessons, there's lots of different instructions. Sometimes it really is about just breaking that down and making it really clear to that student what they need to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, you say it sounds simple, but you know, it does take the ability to recognize and understand what simple solution is needed. But yeah, really hammering home the importance of breaking things down, and as you say, the consistency that is needed. Before we move on to the kind of macro look that we're going to dive into, just one last thing that occurs to me that I wanted to ask you is, and I know it's kind of painting in broad strokes here, and there's a lot more depth we could go into, but with regards to age and the age range across students, are there, and obviously look, in terms of teaching all of the other elements of a curriculum, it changes from year to year, but with regards to teaching children with autism, does that process change with regards to age? Does the particular strategies used for maybe a 5-year-old look very different to a 16, 17-year-old? Or does it just totally come down to the individual in question? So I guess, to what extent is the variable of age, does that affect the approach for teaching children with autism?
It really depends on the individual. Yeah. It really, really depends, because in terms of supporting their own individual needs, it could be that something that really worked for them when they were 6, in terms of maybe we're thinking about, some of those teaching strategies that are quite typical within the early years. Maybe we're using lots of concrete resources. This type of approach is going to still support them when they're 16, for example, depending on, for another person, it might be that this type of support doesn't necessarily help them anymore, or it completely depends on the individual. So I think this is what can be quite challenging for teachers, is that personalization and differentiation within a class, and continuing to provide that personalized support. So it really is very individual, and we definitely can't take a blanket approach, for sure.
Of course. Yeah, no, it makes absolute sense that would be the case. And if we can now, I'm gonna zoom us back out of the classroom, and just try and take a quick look at the kind of, I guess, the bigger picture, the broader spectrum with regards to policy at a higher level, because I know you spoke earlier about, you know, your work with regards to educational programs for teaching children with autism. And I just wanted to, if you could tell us maybe a little more about your work in particular on that level, but also just the state of play with regards to, you know, educational programs at national and international level. I know, you know, the UK is obviously what you're going to be able to speak to with the most authority, but yeah, the extent to which educational programs have been implemented to improve resources and training available to specialist teachers, and consequently for their students. What's the kind of state of play there, and what's your experience with regards to dealing with that?
Yes, and in terms of, well, I mean, there's lots that we could talk about here, but in terms of schools and thinking about their provision for children with special educational needs and the environment that we are providing. Now, in terms of training, there are lots of recognised programs that have been implemented in special schools as well as mainstream schools, and they're really supporting teachers' understanding of supporting different learning needs. So some of the ones, shall I mention a few that have been implemented
Sure.
in the
Yeah,
school?
absolutely.
Okay, so Attention Autism is a program which supports the development of attention skills as well as spontaneous communication. And this is a model that's really, really and highly engaging to children. It's all about using really engaging resources, and it's really supporting teachers to think about the way that they are teaching and the resources that they're using. Are they getting the children's attention straight away? And how can they do that? Because this is so important when we're thinking about teaching any child. Have we got their attention? Are they finding it engaging? And it's a very structured approach, but the principles can be used across teaching in itself. We have a program that's been around for a very long time. It's called Teach, and it's spelt differently, TEACCH, and it actually comes from America. But this model really highlights the use of visual supports to promote independence, as well as the way we are setting up our environment. And environment is so key, and this is something that I really help schools and services think about in terms of, you know, the environment around a student is going to have such an impact on their learning. Everything from the way that they're processing the sensory input around them to things that are perhaps going to take away the focus and attention. So we're thinking about, is there anything, you know, out in the environment that doesn't serve a purpose? When we're thinking about whole school approach, one of the key themes that is really important in the work that I'm doing is and with schools is really recognizing that supporting the teachers and the teaching assistants. So, for example, it's really important and it's necessary that, of course, the teacher and teaching assistant are working together. Now, it might be that it depends on the school, Now, what sometimes happens is teaching assistants may get to be in a position where they are actually planning for this child who has complex needs, when actually we really need to ensure that the teacher and teaching assistant is doing this together. So we're really thinking about supporting teachers, because of course their job is absolutely massive, isn't it? Especially when they've got 30 children in the class. So we're really thinking about supporting and training the teachers and teaching assistants, rather than thinking about just training the support assistants, which sometimes is the case. They'll train the support assistants because they are the ones that are supporting students with special needs on a very kind of close basis. However, it needs to be very much that whole school approach, teachers. So thinking about how we're supporting that and really promoting the training of staff, all staff.
Yeah.
And not just specific staff. Yeah. It needs special educational needs and disability is the responsibility of everybody, and therefore everybody needs to be involved, not just those individuals that are working very closely with them, is kind of what I was talking about there.
Yeah, and it's actually a really important point that I sort of feel many people could miss or overlook or not think about, and sort of assume that, oh, that's something that's the responsibility of specifically specialist teachers or teaching assistants. But yeah, no, it's a really good and important point to make, that it's not just those individuals for whom it is the responsibility. It's the responsibility of everyone involved, the entire school from top down.
Yeah. If we have schools where leadership, teachers, teacher assistants, midday supervisors, they all have that understanding of strategies that can help to support children, it's going to make such a difference, of course, we know, to the individuals. And there's lots of research out there that's showing that when we take an approach whereby everybody is supporting and has a good understanding of children's needs, then children are going to make good progress. We're not relying on just the support assistants. So yeah, it's really important to ensure that everybody is involved. It's everybody's responsibility. How can we make that work?
Yeah, absolutely. And the more voices such as your own crying out for this and pushing in that direction, hopefully the more so we see that come to fruition. Mm-hmm. The last thing I want to ask you, and it's sort of, whatever the topic, something that I find myself asking towards the end of podcasts, sort of an unescapable truth is sort of the situation that we find ourselves in now. Mm-hmm. We're at time of recording, we're I guess early September here, so we've been in this pandemic and been dealing with its consequences for a number of months now, but as to where the end is, nobody really knows as of yet. And it's impacted every walk of life, and of course impacted education in a multitude of ways. Yes. But with regards to our specific topic, teaching children with autism, I just wanted to kind of learn from you how present circumstances, how they've affected schools, the shift to online learning in a lot of situations, how that has impacted the world of specialist autism education. And I guess a follow on from that, what long-term consequences might we see there, if any? Is there going to be a knock-on effect from what's happened now to how specialist autism education is affected? So yeah, I guess first of all, how has it impacted what's going on now? Second of all, how do you think it might impact what happens going forward?
Yeah, of course it is. It's very challenging when we think about, even in different countries, we've got very different circumstances. And when we're thinking about the learning and education of children and students, young people with autism, communication needs, complex needs, it's so important that there are individuals around these students who really understand their learning needs and really can support and empower them. So when we're thinking about perhaps reduced levels of contact, or I mean, even when we're thinking about mask wearing, already we're taking away that ability to see somebody's face, which is something that we've been thinking about a lot. I don't know if you've seen these masks that have the clear cover on the front.
I haven't actually.
Yeah.
That's a new one.
Yeah. Or the face shields.
I have seen some of those, yes.
Yeah. So we're thinking about, okay, right. It's so important that we can model language and for somebody to be able to see our face. So luckily there are now things like these face masks that have a clear window so that somebody can see our face. We've got the face shields if this is something that is a necessity within the setting. Now, what is going to be really important is for that continued access to specialists, to those people that understand the needs of children. And therefore, this is something I've been thinking about a lot in terms of how to ensure we continue the support. And a lot of it has gone from face-to-face to online. Of course, that needs to continue. What I've been focusing on is really supporting the understanding of parents, carers and teachers by making this. I've made some online courses that are really practical and really support people's understanding of what we can do in different circumstances, because it's the people that are around that individual that need to it's so important for them to have that understanding and that knowledge in how to support the learning. For example, during lockdown, there are many parents and carers, looking for ways of how they can teach their children at home, or what can they do with their children. So by giving them the tools and the resources, the same with teachers, it's kind of continuing that access to what's going to really help. So we need to, of course, ensure that continues. Now, in terms of thinking about online learning and technology, we know that we need a good balance of practical learning as well as that online. I had this concern before lockdown in terms of technology and children or students being. Technology is great, and it's helping us in so many ways. But of course, we need to make sure that it's the way it's being used.
Yeah, absolutely.
And how it is supporting learning. So there's a lot of great things out there. But how can we also support that? For example, if a student is using a specific app, or they're using a specific type of online learning, how can they then use what they've learned and take that into a different context? So thinking about how can we ensure that we've got maybe that face-to-face, whether it's going to be online or whether it's going to be in a support bubble. It's so different in different countries at the moment. But yeah, thinking about those ways of learning and ensuring we have a good balance.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds like definitely the right way to think about it going forward. And, you know, challenges raised, of course, by the situation and with regards to technology. But yeah, it's about being responsible with it and about figuring it out the right way. That is all we have time for. Unfortunately, I feel like, you know, there's so much more wisdom we could glean from you with regards to teaching children with autism. But unfortunately, that's all we have time for on our central topic today. However, as regular listeners will know, whenever we have a guest on, we always like to finish up with just a quick fun piece of advice, or maybe it's an anecdote from your teaching days, but just a quick fun little snippet to close us out. So what have you got for us?
Okay, I'd say one of the most important things, and something that I feel I'm doing every day, and that is we have to be a detective. We have to be a detective all the time. We're constantly observing, learning. What are the children showing us through their behaviour, through their responses? Are they perhaps indicating that they're not understanding something? Are they indicating that they're maybe overwhelmed by the sensory input around them? Are they indicating through their behaviour that they're bored or they're not engaged? What are they showing us? So we've got to be a detective in order to then understand, work out some really supportive strategies, and then to help move their learning forward.
There you go. Good piece of advice. It's a dual job, not just a teacher, but a detective at the same time. Got to combine the best of both of those. Very good. Well,
I've got an image of Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, the coat, the hat.
Yeah, exactly.
The eyeglass, everything. Perfect. Alrighty. Well, thank you so much, Steph, for coming on, for talking to us, for sharing your wisdom. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for having me. It's been brilliant. Thank you.
To all the teachers / detectives out there, if you want to listen to more episodes, you can listen to them on whatever platform you're listening to this on. You can check us out on our main site at getatomy.com. For the time being, it is goodbye from Steph.
Thank you very much.
And goodbye from me. See ya.